Hey, I've had a pretty amazing year this year. I've traveled a lot, I've taken a boatload of photos, and I bought this awesome machine. It's my Epson P900. It's a digital printer. It's also a Giclée printer, which is a fancy way of saying digital printing. And despite traveling to some amazing places, I've been to Iceland, I've been to Death Valley, I've traveled to the Canaries, I went to Paris, I shoot a lot in London, all of them amazing places. But this has actually been probably the most significant thing that's happened to my work. And it's really changed the way I create. So in doing so, I've come away with like 10 things that I think are really important when you print digitally. And I thought I'd share them with you. So let's get into it. Before we get started, I thought I'd give you a little background into how I came about buying the printer. Um, I have a past in photography. It used to be a day job. I even had a darkroom at home. I used to take photos, go home and process the film, and then create contact sheets and print the images. It was perfectly normal. It's what you did then. And I loved that whole process, the whole end-to-end process of printing. Since then you speed forward and we've all got digital cameras and kind of forgotten that we used to print our pictures. And I really miss that medium of that sort of process of validating your work in your hands. So whilst I was out in Death Valley earlier this year, I was taking some images and I actually coming away with them. I was thinking these are great images. I'd really love to see them in printed form again. I was really fortunate to be traveling with this wonderful model, Serena, and we'd gone to this, a number of the incredible locations. Death Valley is a place, it's extraordinary. But I hope you can see this. She's lying on one of the beautiful mud flats at the base of Zabriskie Point in Death Valley. And it was an image I was really clear about in my head. I knew I wanted to take this image. We managed to achieve it, which was in itself a pretty big feat. But I was really anyway. It's an image I like, but importantly, I knew I wanted to see it in its printed form. So off I went and I ordered my printer, and when I got back, that was one of the first images I printed. It's on a kind of contrasty stock, and we'll get into all of the sort of details of the different types of papers and different types of inks and things as we get on this video. But I just wanted to share, I've got this background in photography, and it's really shaped how I print today. So the first thing I wanted to know was, what's the difference between a Giclée print, a digital print, and a gelatin print, the kind of picture I would have printed in my darkroom. I've just printed out this A3 image. It's a Giclée print, obviously, and I want to compare it with the gelatin print that's on the wall behind me. I'm going to put this on the proofing table, and we're going to spin the camera around and take a look at the two side by side. So here's our side-by-side comparison. On the right is the Giclée image we've just printed out, and on the left is a silver gelatin print that I must have printed like 25 years ago. This is a test print, and I know it's a test print because there's a mark in the bottom left-hand corner, and I think that's because I pulled it out of the fix a bit too quickly. I wasn't happy with how hot her forehead was. So here's the same image with a correct exposure, and I mounted it into my portfolio. I've got these two as side-by-side comparisons because they're quite representative of my work. I love taking portraits. I love black and white images, and I particularly like quite contrasty images. So if we focus on that bit, you've got some great depths in the blacks. You've got some really good shadow details, and of course some good highlights. So in that context, they're quite comparable. They were shot very differently. This was shot in a studio with flash. This was shot in a studio with daylight. I, of course, took this image using an analog camera, my Mamiya RB67, whereas this was taken with my Sony Alpha. So quite different mediums. But you can achieve quite similar results when you come to editing. So I've added some noise to the edit. I forgot to say this was also shot on quite a draggy shutter. I can't remember, but quite a slow shutter speed. So that's why it looks a little bit out of focus. It's the mood I was going for. I wasn't trying to achieve perfect image quality. I wanted that sort of evocative mood. And if you look at the way it's edited, I've really emphasized the shadow details, and I would have played with the curve to kind of give myself an image that isn't too dissimilar to the kind of image I would have created when I had my darkroom. The other things, I've chosen some paper stock that's quite similar. They're both sort of semi-gloss papers, and therefore you can get quite comparable results. Now I know that they're quite comparable because I've got this printed on framed on my wall, and when I ask people whether they think it's an analog or a digital print, they can't tell the difference. That once it's behind glass, it's quite difficult to make that distinction. Now, whilst I've printed this on some semi-gloss, I actually prefer this paper. This is Canson Etching Edition, and it's a matte paper with a sort of watercolor feel to it. But let's zoom in and have a look at what it does. If you look at the detail in her jacket, there's a lot more depth to those blacks, and it's a great way of showcasing the benefits of a digital printer. You've got more pixels to play with, and you can really bring out more detail. Even though in this case, I was trying to achieve that sort of analog feel to it. And then whilst we're here, Jordan's getting quite a bit of airtime. This is the same model, believe it or not. Now I'm using this to show the difference between that sort of analog look and a very digital look, both taken with the same camera, both taken the same day, in fact, but obviously a color image, and importantly, this is by design a sort of beauty image and very, very sharp quality. Here's a picture of Meg, similar sort of context. And really what I'm trying to say is you bought a printer, or you're thinking of buying a digital printer, and you've got the option of getting something from one extreme to the other, and I personally was really happy with these results. So the second thing I learned actually surprised me. Owning the printer and knowing I was going to take images that ultimately I would print changed the way I took photos. Let's do this another way. Do you know what this is? That is a Polaroid negative. Look, that's me with hair. So yeah, taken quite some time ago. I took that with my Mamiya RB67. You put the Polaroid back on the back of the camera, and you do so to take an image just before you're taking the real pictures. The Polaroid would inform you about the composition, the exposure, and then once you're happy with that, you put the all-important film back on the camera. Inside that film back is a roll of 120, and that can take 10 photos. You've taken your images. I would then go back into my darkroom. I would develop the film. That's going to take some time, and then I would make a contact sheet, and then ultimately I would print some photos. This is an incredibly lengthy process, but it's one that, that's how we took pictures. That was the normal process. And you spin forward to today, and there's none of that. You've got a digital camera. You can take as many pictures as you like. You can see in real time. You can tether. You can see the images as they pop out of the camera. And that's really changed how we capture images today. In fact, the same is true of how we consume images. You think about social media, we're scrolling through those feeds, and we might pass an image that's been taken hours or days, maybe even weeks to sort of organize and then capture and create. And it's a very different approach. Some might say it's not a good thing. But like I said, knowing that I'm going to come back home and I'm going to print, and I'm going to pick some paper that I want, and maybe even stick one of these images on a wall and framed, it's really informing how I capture an image. I might be on location, I might be in a studio, but I'm thinking I'm going to print. So yeah, I know it's a printer, but it's impacting how I capture photos. Like I said, an unusual one, but definitely an unexpected bonus. Right, number 3, paper. This is actually one of the things I was really looking forward to when I got my digital printer. It goes back a bit. I buy a lot of photography books from photographers that I admire. This one is by a chap called Herb Ritts. Say one, it's actually 2 books. It's called Homme Femme, book of male nudes and a book of female nudes. The book has been put together really beautifully. There's a lovely cloth cover. There's an embossed photo. There's some lovely printing on the front. But importantly, when you turn the pages, it feels like you're turning the pages of a collection of art prints that just happen to be in book form. And that's been the benchmark for me when I was printing a long time ago in my darkroom, but also when I was thinking about printing. When I was getting my printer, I've always wanted to be able to. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to create the same work that this guy can. He's an icon of mine, but the quality is something you can strive toward, and that's certainly been something that I've been trying to do. I also, when you buy the number of photography books that I do, you really start to compare the differences, and you might have seen an image on the wall in a gallery or something, and then you see it in printed form. Perhaps it's been printed using a digital printer, and it's got banding on it, and immediately you're thinking it detracts from the quality of the work, and that's been something that I've always been conscious of when I printed my own stuff. And so if you look at in the past, I'd be thinking about the kind of image I'd want to print. I'd be thinking, is this going to be a gloss image? Is it going to be a matte image? Maybe something in between, like a semi-gloss or a pearl, which is kind of similar. And that choice when you're printing in the darkroom, those are pretty standard mediums, regardless of the brand of paper you're buying from. You've got a pretty consistent output. Spin forward to today with the digital printer, with the Giclée printing. You've got a similar sort of collection of stocks types to pick from, the gloss and matte, etc. But there's also this plethora of fine art paper, really thick cotton paper that's much like watercolor paper. And when you're picking these, you can choose kind of a kind of creamy color, or a bit like the one I showed you earlier, kind of high contrasty one, and it really makes a difference with the types of paper. And you can see, just a collection of a few of them behind me. That kind of looks a bit like I've got a shop here. I really don't. I just have lots of different paper stocks, and that's because I really know. For me, it's really important that I'm picking different papers that suit the kind of image that I've taken. And just like I've shown you with the book, I think you can really make a difference when you've got the right type of paper for the image you've just taken. So really consider this when you're getting into printing. It's not just the printer; it's also the different types of papers that you can pick, and it really changes the outcome of the print. Number 4, paper sizes. This one's going to seem quite obvious. Got to put the gloves on. So you bought your large format printer, and there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm for printing on A2. But let's get there slowly. This is a box of A4. This is a lovely stock Canson etching edition. In fact, this is probably too expensive for what I'm about to say. Find yourself some cheap A4 paper, and get your image right on that smaller stock size, and then work your way up to a nicer stock like this one. Once you're happy with the image, the tones and black and white, the colors, you've got those right, then work your way up, find that same paper in a different format. This is A3, A3 plus over there, and these two are A2. That one in the center, the fine art paper, has got to be my favorite. But that's £179. And you only get 25 sheets in it, so that's an incredibly expensive process of testing print. So doing it it's smaller on A4 is obviously a much cheaper, more cost-effective way of approaching this. Here's an example. So there's a picture of Jordan on A4 in that Canson etching edition paper. Here's Jordan in that A3 paper. If you really like it, why not print it out and then frame it like I've done on behind me, or go straight to A2. Now this is a picture we've obviously looked at previously. In fact, that's that fine art paper in the center there. So really different paper stocks, really different sizes, but you don't want to kind of print them out first. You want to try them out on different sizes. And just for context, whilst we're here, here's the A2 and then here's an A4, and you can really see why papers do cost what they cost, because you really do get a lot more paper per sheet. So work your way up to A2, find the most cost-effective ways of doing so that you have a good, fun, enjoyable process of printing. Number 5, print once a week. And no, I don't have shares in Epson. It's actually quite a mechanical thing. We've got 10 ink cartridges here. Each one has its own print head in it. And if they're not used regularly, the print head could dry up, and in doing so, prevent the ink going across the paper in a consistent way. And look, it's quite an obvious thing, but the best way to remedy that is to print quite regularly. I say print once a week. It might be that you print, say, every 7 days, every 2 weeks, but you just don't want to leave it like a month, because after a fashion, they are going to start to dry out. So you could print you could print an A2 picture of Carrie, but that might be a bit excessive once a week. So why not print an A4 picture of Carrie? Alternatively, just do a nozzle check print, which is a collection of lines across a piece of A4 paper. And that allows you just to check the consistency is right, and guarantees that next time you sit down to do some proper printing, you know the print is ready to go and it's going to give you great results. So it's a little bit of admin, but it's an important one. I call it treating myself to a print. It allows me to do something fun. I choose to go down the A4, not the A4 route. Of course, a nozzle check is probably a lot cheaper. Number 6, look after your prints. We've just printed a photo. I'm obviously cheating because this is a print I've made previously, but just imagine it's come out of the printer. The inks can be quite wet, and the paper you've just printed onto, it's an archival paper, and we've been using pigment inks that are also archival. So collectively, we've created an image that is, for all intents and purposes, something that could last for 100 years, maybe longer. We don't really know because the technology is relatively new. But that archival process is going to be interrupted if you use your fingers and you transfer sort of grease or oils from your fingers onto the paper, and all of a sudden that's going to sort of interrupt that archival nature of the print. So always wear the gloves. On top of that, I take the print and I let it rest on a table over there for 24 hours, let the ink settle. And then when I'm storing it, I use acid-free paper or glassine sheets, and that helps prevent the print from being interrupted whilst it's being stored from other air and other elements that could interrupt that archival nature. You saw me previously just sort of holding prints without gloves, and that's because they're images that I keep around here to demonstrate. But if you're going to share your work, if you're going to give them to friends and family, or you're going to sell your pictures, make sure that you follow that archival process, because this image you made could last for 100 years or longer. Wouldn't that be an amazing thing? Number 7, learn to love your monitor. One of the great benefits of digital printing is that what you see on the screen should pop out on the paper when you print it. And a lot of that comes down to the setup. Before we get into that, I should point out that there's a big light source next to you because I'm filming, and the image that you're seeing near the camera is probably slightly different to the image that you can see on the screen. Maybe that's a bit more vivid. Just know that if you're in the room with me, very similar tones and qualities and hues, etc. for the two. And that's the intention. You want to make sure that what you're editing, what you're working on, ends up popping out on the paper. So that's all down to settings. So when I'm shooting in RGB. When I'm editing in Photoshop. That's set in a color space to RGB2. And of course, the monitor is calibrated. It was calibrated when it came to RGB. But that calibration can change over time. So you want to make sure that the monitor is consistent to that RGB standard. And the best way to do that is to use a monitor calibrator. I'm using one by Datacolor, and you hang that across the screen, and you run some software, and it recalibrates the monitor back to RGB standard. So when you hit the export button, save the file to a JPEG, it's going to embed the right color profile, and then send it to the printer. And the printer will know exactly the right profile to print across the paper with, and ultimately give you that print that you're after. Look, it's a little bit of admin. I know that's incredibly dull, having to calibrate your monitor now and then. It will become muscle memory, but if you do that, you're going to guarantee you get an image that matches the image you've been editing on. So remember that one. Love your monitor. Who doesn't love their monitor? Number 8. This is quite a good extension of the previous one. This is all about image proofing. Whilst I've been making these videos, I don't know if you can tell, but it's got dark outside. It's winter here. So the light has changed. And just like calibrating a monitor to make sure it's consistent, you want to make check each test print you do in a consistent way using a consistent light source. As you can tell, I've got lots of different lights in here, but I've learned that I need a big LED light over there where I test my prints, so that I get a consistent way of looking at each image, so I can compare them like for like when I'm doing different test prints. I learned this in a perhaps slightly unusual way. I was outside in the garden. It was summer, and I was just sitting there with a glass of wine, enjoying the evening. And I took a few prints out with me, and I could really tell the difference checking the images in daylight. And that taught me that I needed this light source that I could tune into a nice hue of light and give me that kind of daylight equivalent inside, and not interfere with all these lights that I've got in here. You know, it's lovely. I use like warm LED lights because that's what it's nice to live in. But when you're checking an image, you want a nice consistent light. So I use that big light source that I've got, that I'm also using for this video to when I'm checking my prints. Number 9. There's definitely a honeymoon period when you bought a printer. As you can see, I'm engulfed in prints that I've made, and this is actually quite a small collection of them since I've bought my printer. But each one, just like the different lessons we've been learning on this video, I've learned tons, right? I've learned loads about colors that I like to print with, loads of papers I like to print onto. Obviously different types of black and white printing and sizes, and this sort of represents, oh, and don't forget, print once a week, right? So you got extra images you end up with, but you quickly realize it's not sustainable financially, right? So you want to be quite selective about the images you print. And this kind of goes back, for me, it goes back to this image I've got on my screen here. This is an image I took of Kate in Malta. And it was a great inflection point for me because I came home knowing this was an image I wanted to print. It was one of the first ones I sent away to have printed professionally. In fact, it's on a wall behind where the camera is, printed quite big and framed. I always joke that the frame cost me more than the flight to Malta to take the picture. But that sort of love of figuring out that that's an image that I know I wanted to print is a great way of benchmarking which ones you're going to actually print. As you can see, I got there quite cathartically, but now when I'm printing, I'm quite selective about the images because it's also it's expensive, right? The different papers and things, and I actually like to print big, despite what this collection of images in front of you suggests. The other thing is these are archival prints, right? So what happens if you're judged 100 years from now on the print? So you, for whatever reason, you're printing an image. Make sure when you're printing the image, it's an image that you think is truly printworthy. Number 10, and the last one, selling your work. When I bought this printer, it was really just for me. I've explained I've got a background in photography but also printing, and I really wanted to kind of go back and regress in many ways to that time where you could complete the end-to-end process of taking images but also printing them. And I firmly believe that you need to see an image in its true intended form in print. The idea of selling my work was a long way away. I wasn't considering it at all. But I'm somebody who likes to share my work on social media, but also my website. And typically I'll put together a number of images and I'll post them. But more recently, I've been filming myself as I print the image and then taking a photo of that same print and then including that in a carousel on Instagram and other forms of social media. And as I was doing that, I was starting to get some feedback, starting to get some really nice things that people were saying, including people starting to say, "Hey, I'd love to buy that print from you." And suddenly I'm thinking, "Gosh, well, I've got Squarespace. I've got this website I use. That's got built-in e-commerce capability, and I could set up a web shop and see how it goes." I suddenly had to learn about international shipping rates, and I was buying cardboard tubes and folding my prints up in acid-free tissue paper, as we discussed. I was even printing out little leaflets to say thank you for buying my prints. It was a real kick, but I was quickly realizing that despite selling prints, I was never really going to recoup the total cost of how it, what it cost to actually capture the image, the travel, the accommodation, the people I was working with, and then of course things like the printer and the ink and the paper. Collectively, it really adds up, and you'd have to print and sell, a good number of prints to monetize that correctly across, what is it, 30, 40 pictures, maybe 50 pictures, to really, get that cash back. But in many ways, the money, it'd be lovely to break even, but the money is one thing. The reality is that what was really doing it for me is somebody saying, "Hey, I'd love that on my wall." I'm somebody who loves prints on my wall. I love printing and framing my images, and if you watched the video, you will have seen lots of different frames on my wall here in my studio. But I know how precious the wall space is. This studio is mine. I can do what I like with it. Go across the garden to where my house is, where my family is, it's a different story. Everyone's got a different opinion. And of course, art is subjective. So when somebody says, I'd love that on my wall, I know how precious that wall space is. So that's, for me, has become a true validation. And I appreciate it's a pretty high benchmark to make. But if you're buying a printer, you're able to print your own work, and if you can sell it and somebody else wants it on that wall, that has to be the ultimate benchmark and the ultimate goal for owning such a thing. Anyway, look, I hope you found these tips useful. If you have, give me a like and maybe hit that subscribe button. It helps make more of these.